vampires aren't real, right? Most of us would say, no, of course not. But some people not only believe that they exist, but they believe that they are a vampire or they can become one. Or some people just feel the need to feed on human blood. In extreme cases, these bizarre beliefs can have deadly consequences. In today's video, we'll examine 3 of those cases. But before we start today's video, we want to bring you a word from our amazing sponsor, Magellan TV. I don't know about you, but I'm always on the lookout for something new and interesting to watch, and that's why I love Magellan TV. Magellan TV is a great streaming service that has over 3,000 documentaries. A fascinating documentary that I watched while I was working on this video is called Vampire Skeletons. It's about a mass grave that was found in 2004 in Ireland that contained human bodies that were thousands of years old. It appears that horrible things were done to the bodies after the people were dead. The documentary explores the notion that whoever did the damage to the bodies did so because they thought that the people were vampires. It's an amazing documentary, and it's great for anyone who likes history, archaeology, and the supernatural. Vampire Skeletons is just one example of the many great documentaries that they have on Magellan TV. They also have great selections of biographies, true crime documentaries, and science and tech documentaries. Magellan TV is very accessible. You can watch it anywhere, at any time, on your TV, laptop, or mobile device. You can also cast from your phone to your TV. It works with Apple TV, iOS, Google Play, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and so many more. Magellan TV has a special offer for criminally listed viewers. Just go to try.magellantv.com/criminally listed. You'll get a month for free. Check out Magellan TV today because you'll find something great to watch and you'll help support Criminally Listed. Number 3. Matthew Hardman. Untitled Chapter is a quaint town on the island of Anglesey, which is in North Wales. The village's full name, which is on the screen now, has 58 letters and 19 syllables. It's the longest place name in Europe and the second longest in the world. If I had 1,000 years to learn how to say it correctly, I probably couldn't do it, so here's the pronunciation from Wikipedia.
Llanfair Pwllgwyngyll Goger Chwrndrobwll Llantysilio Gogogoch.
In 2001, the village had a population of around 3,000 people. In November 2001, 9-year-old Mabel Leishan lived in a house in the village. Leishan was a widow who lived alone. She was hard of hearing and her eyesight was failing. On Sunday, November 25th, 2001, a social worker brought her some lunch. The social worker made a horrifying discovery. Leishan's dead body was in a chair and her chest cavity was open. The police were able to reconstruct the crime based on evidence found at the crime scene and the medical examiner's report. The night before Leishan's body was found, she was sitting in her favorite armchair watching TV. The killer broke a glass panel on the back door and then he was able to open the door. Since Leishan was hard of hearing, the killer would have had no problem breaking in. He then snuck up behind her and attacked her. The 9-year-old was stabbed 22 times. Her chest cavity was open and her heart was removed. Her heart was wrapped in a newspaper and then placed in an enamel saucepan. The saucepan was sitting on a silver platter beside the body. There was some more blood in the saucepan. There were also cuts on Leishan's legs. The police thought that the killer tried to get blood from the legs into the saucepan. At Leishan's feet there were 2 fire pokers, and they were placed in a way to look like a crucifix. A candlestick was on the floor beside the chair. There was also a red candle on the mantelpiece. The police had no idea who would want to brutally murder 9-year-old Mabel Leishan. They were also baffled as to the motive. There was a large sum of money in the home, but nothing had been stolen. Also, there were no signs of sexual assault. The police thought that there was a ritualistic aspect to the murder. As for a suspect, the police thought that the killer might have had medical training or they were a butcher. While the police had their theories, it did not lead to an arrest in the days or even the weeks after the murder. The investigation into the murder was the biggest police investigation in the history of North Wales. 60 police officers ended up interviewing over 600 people. They went door to door and asked every male between the ages of 18 and 60 for a sample of their DNA. The police also investigated the shoe prints found at the crime scene. They learned that the soles were from a pair of Levi's trainers. It turned out that the style of shoe was only sold in one store in the area, and they had only sold 53 pairs. 48 pairs were purchased with a credit card. Those 48 purchasers were questioned and cleared as suspects. On December 20th, nearly a month after the murder, the popular UK television show Crime Watch did a segment on Mabel LaShawn's murder. After the segment aired, the police got over 100 tips. One of those tips came from a teenage girl who was a foreign exchange student from Germany. She said that she had several strange encounters with a 17-year-old boy named Matthew Hardman. She said that about 2 months before LaShawn was murdered, she was at a party. Hardman told her that the village was the best place for a vampire to live and hunt because so many elderly people lived in the area. Hardman said that a vampire could feed off the elderly people and no one would notice because they would think that they had died from natural causes. Also, at a party, Hardman accused the exchange student of being a vampire, and he said he wanted to become a vampire as well. He then tried to force her to bite his neck. He held her down on a bed and forced his neck into her mouth. Hardman was caught assaulting the girl, and he was asked to leave the party. He refused to leave, so the police were called. Hardman was arrested, but he wasn't charged with anything. After the police received the tip about Hardman, they started to investigate him. Matthew Hardman was born in 1984. He lived his early life in a town on the northern coast of Anglesey. When he was young, his parents split up. Hardman and his mother moved to Untitled Chapter in 1998. His mother worked as a nurse. The same year that they moved, Hardman's father, a firefighter, had a massive asthma attack and died. The loss deeply affected 13-year-old Hardman. When Hardman was 16, he started studying art and design at a local college. He also worked as a kitchen porter at a hotel on the island. Hardman and his mother lived about 200 yards from Mabel LaShawn's home. Hardman had a weekly paper route between the ages of 13 and 16. LaShawn's home was on his paper route. On January 8, 2002, the police arrested 17-year-old Matthew Hardman. The police searched Hardman's home and they found a large knife in the pocket of his coat. The knife was forensically checked and DNA belonging to Mabel LaShawn was found on it. Early in the investigation, when the police went door to door collecting DNA samples, they would have not collected a sample from 17-year-old Matthew Hardman because they were only collecting DNA from men who were between the ages of 18 and 60. After Hardman was arrested, the police got a sample of his DNA. His DNA was matched to DNA found on a windowsill in LaShawn's home. His DNA was mixed with LaShawn's blood. Also, Hardman had a pair of Levi's trainers and his shoe prints matched the shoe prints left at the crime scene. The police looked at his internet history and discovered he frequently visited websites dedicated to vampirism. He also had a magazine that contained instructions on conducting a black mass and how to cook human flesh. The police concluded that Hardman thought that vampires were real and he wanted to be one. They thought that Hardman believed he would become a vampire if he drank LaShawn's blood. Over 3 days, Matthew Hardman was interviewed by the police and he denied committing the murder. He also said he wasn't obsessed with vampires. He just said he had a passing interest in them. Hardman's family, friends, and classmates were shocked by his arrest. They thought he was a nice, quiet young man. None of them realized he was fascinated with vampires. They said that he never wore black or dressed like a goth. Matthew Hardman went to trial in July 2002. The prosecution said that Hardman had become obsessed with 2 questions. How could he become a vampire? And how could he become immortal? The prosecution argued that Hardman thought that if he drank Mabel LaShawn's blood, he would become an immortal vampire. The medical examiner testified. He said that the top of LaShawn's heart had been cut off. He said that Hardman probably tried to get blood from LaShawn's legs after she was dead. But this would have been difficult because after someone dies, their heart stops pumping blood so they don't bleed. He said that Hardman probably removed the heart and tried to squeeze the blood out of it. Hardman's trial lasted 3 weeks, and then the jury deliberated for 4 hours. He was found guilty, and he was given a life sentence. The judge ruled he must serve a minimum of 12 years of prison. This means that Hardman could have been released in 2014. However, at the time of this video, he's still in prison. Hardman may be released if he confesses to the murder, but he has never admitted that he killed Mabel LaShawn. But even if he does confess, there's no guarantee that he will ever be released. Number 2. Tracey Wigginton. Tracey Wigginton was born in 1965 in Rockhampton, Australia. Her parents' marriage didn't last long. Tracey's mother, Rachel, became ill when Tracey was young, so she arranged for her parents, Avril and Greg, to adopt Tracey. Tracey's grandparents/adoptive parents were wealthy. Tracey would later claim that they were abusive. She said that her grandfather sexually abused her. She thought that her grandmother knew about the abuse but did nothing about it. She also said that her grandmother was physically abusive. Tracey's grandparents died when she was in high school. She lost interest in attending school after her grandmother died. She inherited some of her grandparents' fortune so she didn't have to work. When Tracey was in her late teens, she moved in with some friends, Catherine and her boyfriend Ron, and Catherine's daughter. Tracey started to have an affair with Ron. Then, Catherine's daughter told Tracey that Ron had been sexually abusing her. Tracey relayed this information onto Catherine and she threw Ron out. Then, Tracey and Catherine started a romantic relationship. It was the first same-sex relationship that Tracey had been in. Tracey and Catherine eventually broke up and Tracey started dating different women. Tracey had a temper and she was known to get violent with her partners. Sometime around October 1989, Tracey started telling her friends that she was a vampire. She also told her friends that she had supernatural powers. For example, she could make herself disappear. Her friends noticed she hated the sunlight and rarely went out during the day. She was never outside in the sunlight without her sunglasses on. Tracey's girlfriend said that Tracey would go to the butcher shop and get cow and pig's blood to drink. Tracey's girlfriend also said that Tracey convinced her to cut her wrists so she could drink her blood. One time, Tracey and her friends went to a graveyard to have a picnic and they stole a headstone. Because of all this, Tracey's girlfriend and her friends genuinely believed she was a vampire. On the night of October 19th, 1989, 23-year-old Tracey, her girlfriend, and two friends went into a bar in Brisbane. Tracey said she felt the need to feed that night. What happened next is a bit unclear. One version of events is that Tracey and her friends came up with a plan that they wanted to do that night. They were going to find a man and take him to the river. Tracey would pretend to want to have sex with him and then they would leave him there. Another version of what happened that night is that Tracey wanted to get a man so she could drink his blood. Nevertheless, all four women got into Tracey's car at around 11:30 p.m. and they started cruising the streets. Sometime after midnight, they came across 47-year-old Edward Bulldog. Bulldog was the father of four and a grandfather to two. He had spent the night drinking with friends in a pub. He was waiting for a taxi to take him home when the four women happened upon him. They asked him if he wanted a ride. Tracey implied that if he came with them, she might have sex with him. Bulldog thought it was his lucky night, so he got into the car. They drove out to an area near the river. Then Bulldog and Tracey went to a field next to the river. She took off her shirt and she said she would be back in a minute after she urinated. Bulldog got undressed and folded his clothes. Then Tracey came up from behind him and stabbed him in the neck with a knife she was carrying. She then stabbed him 26 more times and his throat was slit from ear to ear. Bulldog was nearly decapitated in the attack. As Bulldog lay dying, Tracey smoked a cigarette and watched him expire. Tracey then went to the river where she threw the knife and then she washed the blood off herself. She put her shirt back on and then returned to the car where her friends were waiting. They went home and went to bed. The next morning, the dead body of 47-year-old Edward Bulldog was found by some hikers. The police searched the area around the body and they found a bank card with the name Tracey Wigginton on it. For some reason, the bank card was in Bulldog's shoe. The police went to Tracey's home about 3 hours after the body was found. She initially said that she didn't know anything about the murder. The police looked in her car and they found some traces of blood. The police interviewed Tracey's friends and they said they didn't witness it, but they were sure that Tracey had killed Bulldog. Tracey was confronted with this information and she confessed to the murder. Tracey's friends told the police that they thought that Tracey was a vampire, and on the night of the murder, she had talked about wanting to feed. They said that after she got back into the car after the murder, her breath smelled like blood. Also, the medical examiner noticed marks in the blood on the body that seemed to indicate that someone drank the victim's blood. Tracey has always denied that she drank Bulldog's blood. The police were confused about how Tracey's bank card ended up in Bulldog's shoe. Tracey explained that the bank card had been in her blouse's pocket and it must have fallen out when she took her shirt off. Bulldog probably saw it and thought it was his card, so he put it in his shoe. In the months after Tracey was arrested, she saw a psychiatrist. He became convinced that she suffered from dissociative identity disorder, formerly known as multiple personality disorder. 2 other psychiatrists agreed with the assessment. Tracey underwent hypnosis, and the psychiatrist claims he uncovered 6 personalities. The first personality was the host personality, which is what most people met. The second personality was Big Tracey, who was a combination of the different personalities. Then there was a 16-year-old boy named Bobby, who probably manifested himself after Tracey was sexually abused by her grandfather. The fourth personality was the observer, and she watched what the other personalities did. The fifth personality was Little Tracey. She only existed for a short time after Tracey was sexually abused. She was described as a frightened little child. The last personality was April, who controlled Bobby by screaming inside of Tracey's head. Tracey would get terrible headaches, and the psychiatrist attributed the headaches to April screaming. The psychiatrist also thought that April was probably in control on the night of the murder. Nevertheless, the judge ruled that Tracey was fit to stand trial. She pleaded guilty to murder in January 1991, and she was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 13 years. Tracey had her ups and downs in prison. For 5 years, she used heroin, and then she got hepatitis C because she used an infected needle. But Tracey also got her Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy and Anthropology from a university in Victoria. And she got trade certificates for welding and to drive bobcats and forklifts. Tracey applied for parole 4 times. She was granted parole in January 2012. She had served over 21 years for the brutal murder. At the time of this video, it's believed that 55-year-old Tracey Wigginton lives in Tamboran, Queensland, Australia. Number 1. Richard Chase. As 1977 was coming to an end, Ambrose Griffin was 51 years old, and he lived in Sacramento, California, with his wife and 2 sons. He worked as an engineer for the Federal Bureau of Land Management. On December 29, 1977, Ambrose went out grocery shopping with his wife, Carol. When they got home, they carried some groceries in, and then Ambrose went back out to the car to get the remainder of the groceries. But he never made it to the car. He gave a short yell and then collapsed in the doorway of his home. His wife assumed he had suffered a heart attack, and she had one of her sons call 911. It turned out that Ambrose had been shot with a .22 caliber handgun. He was rushed to the hospital, but he died a short time later. A neighbor recalled hearing 2 loud pops around the time of the shooting. The police could not figure out a motive. Ambrose didn't have any enemies, and he was a mid-level civil servant. The police thought that someone, possibly a kid, blindly fired off 2 shots, and Ambrose was accidentally killed. Over the next 3 weeks, 2 more people, a young boy and a woman, were also randomly shot at. Both times the shooter missed. In the case of the woman, the bullet went into a shelf in a cupboard. The police collected the bullet and compared it to the bullet that killed Ambrose Griffin. They determined that both were fired from the same .22 caliber handgun. The police then thought that they might have a gunman who was firing at random people. But once again, no arrests were made. On the afternoon of January 23, 1977, About 3.5 weeks after Ambrose's murder, 22-year-old Tracey Wigginton was home alone in Sacramento. Wigginton was married and she was 3 months pregnant. She had recently got a job with the state of California, but she hadn't started work yet. During the day, Wigginton didn't lock the doors of her home. That evening, at around 6 p.m., her husband returned home from work. He entered their home through the front door, and he found stains in the front doorway that led to the master bedroom. He initially thought that they were oil stains. He followed the stains and opened the bedroom door. He then started screaming. The police were called, and they were there within minutes. Tracey Wigginton had been shot 3 times at close range with a .22 caliber handgun. 1 bullet had entered the victim's hand and 2 other went into her head. The police thought she was probably shot in the doorway and then she was dragged into the bedroom. She was then cut from the bottom of her sternum to her left hip bone. The mutilation was performed post-mortem. Next to her body was a blood-stained yogurt cup. The neighbors reported seeing a weird man in the neighborhood before the murder. He was thin and dirty. He was wearing an orange parka and blue jeans. A short distance away from the crime scene, a 6-inch steak knife was found in a storm drain. It came from Wigginton's kitchen and was most likely what was used to cut her open. The crime scene didn't make a lot of sense to the police. Nothing in the home appeared to have been stolen, and Wigginton had not been sexually assaulted. The police thought that because Wigginton had been shot with a .22 caliber handgun, she may have been killed by the same person who killed Ambrose Griffin. The bullets were compared, and they may have been fired from the same gun. But because of the limits of technology, the ballistic expert couldn't say for sure if they were fired from the same gun. While the police thought that the murders may have been connected, they still didn't have a suspect. The lead detective on the case contacted the Behavioral Science Unit at the FBI. Special Agent Robert Ressler developed a profile. While Ressler was horrified by the crimes, he was excited to be involved in the case. Usually, investigators contacted his team when cases were cold. Ressler's profile of the killer was that he was a white man between the ages of 25 and 27. He was probably thin and looked undernourished. He would dress slovenly and wouldn't care much about his appearance. He probably lived alone, and his home would also be filthy. He probably did not have a job, and he was probably living off some form of disability money. Finally, he probably suffered from paranoid psychosis. Unfortunately, the profile did not lead to an immediate arrest. Evelyn Moroth lived in Sacramento with her 2 sons, 13-year-old Vernon and 6-year-old Jason. On the morning of January 27, 1977, Evelyn, who was divorced, was at home with her son Jason. Her friend, 51-year-old Dan Meredith, was visiting. It had been 4 days since Tracey Wigginton had been brutally murdered. Evelyn and her family had plans that morning, but no one saw them stirring. A friend went over to her home and tried to open the front door, but it was locked. She went around to the back of the house and found the back door unlocked. She entered the house, and laying partially in the living room and in the hallway was the body of a man. He was lying in a pool of blood. She quickly got out of the home and called the police. The police determined that the killer entered the home through the unlocked back door. At close range, he shot Dan Meredith twice with a .22 caliber handgun. In the master bedroom, on the bed, was Evelyn's dead body. She had been shot once in the head. Her body was mutilated in the same way as Tracey Wigginton's body. She was nude, and a large amount of semen was found in her anal cavity. In the nearby bathroom, the bathtub was filled with bloody water. The detectives thought that Evelyn was in the bath when the killer got into the house. He shot her in the bathtub and then dragged her body into the master bedroom. The police found a second body in the master bedroom. It was Evelyn's 6-year-old son, Jason. He had been shot twice in the head. The detectives knew that the murders were most likely committed by the same man who killed Ambrose Griffin and Tracey Wigginton. Shortly after the bodies were found, a woman named Karen Fiera arrived at the crime scene. She was Evelyn's sister-in-law. She told the police that she had dropped off her son, 22-month-old David, that morning with Evelyn so she could babysit him. The police searched the house and David was not inside of it. They did find an empty crib and it was drenched in blood. They also saw a trail of blood leading away from the crib. Because of the amount of blood in the crib, the police thought that David was probably dead. But why would the killer take the body with him? Dan Meredith had driven over to Evelyn's house and his car keys and his car were missing. His car was found a little more than a mile away from the crime scene. It was parked in the parking lot of an apartment building. However, the discovery of the car did not lead to a suspect or David Ferreira. Robert Ressler was notified again and he was given the details of the murders. To him, it was clear that the killer was escalating. He determined that the murderer was a disorganized serial killer. Disorganized serial killers are usually loners and they are physically unattractive. They often don't take care of themselves. They sometimes kill people at random, so they don't necessarily have a victim type. They also aren't very meticulous when it comes to cleaning up or hiding evidence. Organized serial killers are much different than disorganized serial killers. Organized serial killers are multiple murderers like Dennis Rader, Edmund Kemper, and Ted Bundy. Often, they come across as ordinary, everyday people. They could be a neighbor or a coworker you would suspect are serial killers. They are also more methodical in their choice of victims and the execution of their crimes. Since the killer in Sacramento was disorganized, Ressler thought that he abandoned the car near his home. He thought that the killer lived half a mile to a mile from where he abandoned the car. The day after the murders, a woman contacted the police and told them about a strange experience she had with a man she went to high school with. The encounter happened about an hour before Tracey Wigginton was killed. The woman was shopping when a thin, unkempt man with dirty hands and a waxy complexion came up to her. He asked her if she had been on the motorcycle when Kurt was killed. The woman thought it was an odd question. She had dated a man named Kirk a few years earlier, but they had broken up. Years after they stopped dating, Kurt died in a motorcycle accident. She told the man she wasn't on the motorcycle, and then she asked who he was. He said that he was Richard Chase. The woman didn't recognize Chase because he had changed so much from high school. Chase had even dated her older sister for a short time. She recalled that there had been talk that Chase had gotten into drugs. By his appearance, she thought that was true. The woman quickly got away from Chase. He then followed her out to her car but she was able to get away from him. The store where she was shopping was just a few blocks from Tracey Wigginton's home. Wigginton had been in the same store that morning a few hours before she was murdered. The police then looked up 27-year-old Richard Trenton Chase's background. Chase was born in May 1950 in Santa Clara County, California. His father was strict and possibly abused Chase. When Chase was 10 years old, several cats in his neighborhood went missing. Like many serial killers when they were young, it's believed that Chase preyed on pets in his neighborhood. During Chase's teen years, his parents would often fight. They even went through a trial separation, but then got back together. Chase was well-groomed and well-mannered in high school. He had many friends, both male and female. He dated 2 young girls and attempted to have sex with both of them. However, he couldn't maintain an erection. Chase's sexual inadequacies and his family life made him angry. His mental health also deteriorated heavily. Throughout his teens and into his 20s, he drank and did drugs. He had a problem holding down jobs. In 1972, his parents separated again, and then they got divorced the next year. In 1973, Chase was admitted to a hospital complaining of strange ailments. He said that his heart and his kidneys had stopped working. He also said that his pulmonary artery had been stolen and his blood was no longer flowing. Chase was examined and there was nothing physically wrong with him. He was then sent to the psychiatric ward. He was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. For the next several years, he was in and out of the hospital and treatment facilities. At one treatment facility, Chase got the nickname Dracula because he was obsessed with blood. He often complained that his blood was being poisoned. One day in April 1976, his father went over to his apartment and found him incredibly ill. Chase had injected himself with rabbit blood. He was once again hospitalized in the psychiatric ward. Chase escaped when they refused to release him because they considered him dangerous. He was arrested the next day and brought back to the hospital. He was released several months later in September 1976. He then moved into an apartment which was paid for by his parents. Then, in December 1977, Ambrose Griffin was murdered. The police got Chase's photo from an arrest in 1977 for possession of marijuana. They compared it to the sketch they had of the killer, and they were shocked by how similar they looked. The detectives thought that Chase was a plausible suspect, so they went to his apartment. His apartment building was just a couple hundred yards from where Dan Meredith's car was abandoned. When the police got to Chase's apartment, they found out he had moved about 2 weeks earlier. They talked to the building manager, and they found out he had just moved into a different apartment in the building. The manager said that Chase was quiet and she never had a complaint about him. He lived alone and his mother paid his rent. Recently, Chase wouldn't let his mother into his apartment and he would only talk to her by opening the door a crack. The police knocked on Chase's door, but he refused to open the door. So they decided to wait him out. A short time later, Chase emerged from his apartment. The detectives said they wanted to talk to him. Chase took off running. The detectives caught him, and there was a struggle. But one of the detectives was able to get handcuffs on Chase. He was searched and he had a .22 caliber handgun on him. He was wearing a dirty orange ski jacket and filthy jeans. There appeared to be blood on both his clothes and his shoes. In the back pocket of his jeans was Dan Meredith's wallet. They also found Meredith's keys in one of his pockets. The police searched Chase's apartment. As Robert Ressler predicted, it was incredibly dirty. There were several blood-stained items. This included a blender, a plate, a plastic cup, and utensils. Richard Chase was questioned, and he denied killing anyone. Nevertheless, he was charged with 6 counts of murder, and he was held without bail. On February 16, 1978, Richard Chase was in jail, and he started talking about the murders with another inmate. Chase told him that he had blood poisoning and he needed to drink blood to stay alive. He first used animal blood, but then he decided to use human blood. He said he drank blood from both of his female victims. Chase then told him he took David Ferrera's body home, where he drank some of his blood as well. He then placed David's body in the trash. But this wasn't true. On March 24, 1987, less than a month after Chase was arrested, David's body was found in a box in a vacant lot between a church and a supermarket. His detached head was under his body. David had died from a single gunshot wound to the head. Richard Chase's trial for all 6 murders started on January 2, 1979. He pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. However, 2 psychiatrists who examined him said that he was sane. They said that Chase knew that murder was wrong, but he still killed 6 people. Chase's trial lasted for 4 months. The jury deliberated for about 5 hours. They found Chase guilty of all 6 murders. Chase, who was dubbed the Vampire of Sacramento, was sentenced to death. Just over a year and a half later, on the day after Christmas 1980, 30-year-old Richard Chase was found dead in his cell. Chase had hoarded his psychiatric pills and overdosed on them. The Behavioral Analysis Unit, formerly known as the Behavioral Sciences Unit, still uses Richard Chase as an example of a disorganized serial killer while giving seminars on criminal profiling. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you found it interesting, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos just like it. Also, if you are looking for something new to watch, why not check out my new channel, Chapter Dark. The videos are mysteries that you can try and solve. Do you have what it takes to solve these mysteries? You can find a link to Chapter Dark in the description box below. But that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.